Hello, and welcome to Order Within, navigating a world of endless chaos and crisis. Many of us are experiencing inner turmoil, insecurity, anxiety, fears, and isolation. These feelings are only being amplified by news cycles, social media, and never-ending political madness. How do we find our way out of the chaos? How do we find strength within ourselves? How do we find meaning in a world driven by materialism? These questions and many more I aim to answer on the show. My goal is to be a trusted guide on your journey to selfhood. May you find what you seek. Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Brandon Ward, back with another episode of Order Within. We have a phenomenal guest today. I'm a little fanboy today, guys. So if I'm a little goofy, it's just because I've got a phenomenal guest, Dr. Margaret Paul. She and her work has really impacted me and many of the people in my life in a very positive way. Dr. Paul is the author and co-author of several best-selling books, including Do I Have to Give Up Me to Be Loved by You?, Interbonding, Healing Your Aloneness, the Healing Your Aloneness Workbook, Do I Have to Give Up Me to Be Loved by My Kids? Do I Have to Give Up Me to Be Loved by God? And her recent books, Diet for Divine Connection, Beyond Junk Foods and Junk Thoughts to At Will Spiritual Connection. She holds a PhD in psychology and is a relationship expert, noted public speaker, workshop leader, educator, chaplain, consultant, and artist. Dr. Paul, welcome.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you. Honestly, it's great you're here. And, frankly, not enough people in my mind are aware of the phenomenal work that you do and the impact that it can make, the practical component of it. I've been talking about your work on my show. I've been doing this for 70 plus episodes in. I've talked about your work, many episodes. I've shared the work that you do with many people in my life. My wife's actually going through your Interbonding workbook now. It's really helping her a ton. So getting us started, what got you into all this work?
Well, like so many people, I came from a dysfunctional family. And when I was 5 years old, I was kind of a wreck. And my mother decided that it was my fault that I was a wreck. So she took me to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist talked to me and talked to my mother and then said to me, tell your mother not to yell at you. My mother was a screamer and made me very nervous. And so my thought was, I'm only 5 years old. She's not going to listen to me. You tell her. And my next thought was, I can do a better job than you. And that was the moment I decided that I was going to be a psychologist. That moment.
At 5.
Yeah.
That is wild. Talk about a true calling.
Right.
Well, it's funny. I'm not surprised by that. It's all the work that you've read. I hadn't heard your origin story, the work that I've learning and building off your work. I didn't know the origin story of that, but 5 years old, you knew it.
Yeah.
Well, the way you execute your work, the way you do the things that you do, I'm not surprised by that because it really truly seems to me that this is your spiritual calling while you're in the world. You've been expanding your work too of late too, how you've gone from really a lot of the inner world, but now you're focusing on nutrition too, which I'm excited to get into a bit. But one of the things, I actually read your Healing Your Aloneness book.
Mhm.
That's what really helped me. And I think a lot of people don't understand, and this is where I was. I was doing all the things that I thought you were supposed to do. I was living a good life. I had a good job. I had friends. I was all these external things, right? I was out of my house for many years. I was in my late 20s, but I was still feeling like I remember feeling when I was a child, anxious, insecure, scared. And it wasn't until I read your book and then I started to understand that I had actually adopted a lot of those parental practices and had been ongoing as an adult. This happens to all of us, doesn't it? We just pick up what we learn and move on unless we recognize it.
Yeah.
Would you see this as a very common thing?
It happens to almost everybody. And yet we say, I'm not going to be like my mom or I'm not going to be like my dad. But then we absorb their false beliefs. We absorb their fears, their woundedness, their ways of taking care of themselves. They think they're taking care of themselves. They're trying to be safe. But really what most of our parents learned to do was abandon themselves. And so we pick that up and we learn to abandon ourselves. And then it really shows up when people get into relationships, because that's when they
Oh,
start to act out the patterns that they saw their parents or other caregivers acting out. And then they really run into problems. I work with a lot of people who think, oh, they're fine, they're happy, they're doing great until they get into a relationship. And then everything that's unhealed comes to the surface. And that's great because then they can deal with it if they're open to that. Mm.
that's the key, right? For the longest time, I felt burdened by a lot of those things, but I didn't realize now, looking back, it's a blessing. Being able to see that, being able to recognize what's hindering us, what we may be holding on
Right.
to, and the opportunity to reflect on that and move forward is truly a blessing. And that's the work that you did. The tools that you gave me were I've never heard of the concept prior to your work of the inner child and the parent and how that reflects and kind of the logical approach as a parent, and the inner child is really our emotional, our
Right.
creative, all the and all those things that I felt in as an adult, I realized were coming from what I had been feeling as a child, and I had been feeling those things all my life. And I think we often make the mistake that once we get out of childhood or we leave our parents' house, just like we said, a second ago, that we're free of those things because we're not in the environment now.
Right.
But it's not. It's further. That's the furthest away from the truth, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and the brain research actually proves that because in the lower left part of our brain, this is the lower left amygdala. This is the fight or flight
Hmm.
mechanism, and this is where all the fears and false beliefs get stored. The right side is our inner child, the emotional aspect, but these are all stored here, and they're unconscious or subconscious, and we don't realize that we're operating from these beliefs that are governing our life. And when this part of our brain is in charge, it's informing the upper left brain, which is the action oriented part. The upper right brain actually is born with an ability to connect to a higher source of love. But because so many of us didn't get supported in our own inner knowing or our own intuition, I was told when I had intuition is don't be ridiculous. Like I wasn't supposed to know what I knew. And so we kind of squashed that. So many people squash that. And when our upper left brain, the action oriented part, is being informed by our lower left brain, then we act out in ways that are not loving to ourselves and not loving to others. And inner bonding, the process that that I teach, is about developing our loving adult, which is both sides of our upper right brain, so that we're accessing a source of truth and our actions are coming from a source of truth rather than from the fears and false beliefs of that wounded part of ourselves.
Oh, it's beautiful. Well, and I think that distinction between our beliefs that we carry and then our actions, that was the difference for me. I was in a lot of my life trying to work on myself and doing affirmations, and I kind of fell into the secret trap a bit, or this idea that you can just repeat things or look at yourself in the
Right.
mirror, and I did that for years and struggled. But it wasn't until I started taking loving action, which is really shifting into that loving
Oh, yeah.
adult, that my life
Mhm.
started to change. But it was a slow, steady, bit by bit. But to your point, it really is I recognize that it's my responsibility to parent myself now, and I'm no longer at the mercy of anyone else.
Yeah, and what we don't learn as we're growing up, what I certainly didn't learn, is that I'm responsible for my feelings. When we talk about parenting ourselves, like if you think about a child who comes to you upset, a loving parent will not just keep working on the computer or reading the book or drinking alcohol or whatever. A loving parent will open arms and attend to the feelings and want to
Mhm.
understand what's going on. But how many of us have learned to do that for ourselves? I never saw my parents take any responsibility for their feelings at all. It was always blame. It was either blaming,
Mm.
withdrawing, shutting down, turning to addictions. None of that is responsible for our feelings. And so most people never even consider taking responsibility for their feelings because they don't even know that they are responsible and they've never seen anybody do that. And this is what interbonding
Mhm.
teaches people to do. is how to take responsibility for your own feelings and not be a victim of life and not be a victim of others.
That's and that going through that experience, Dr. Paul, is truly life
Well,
changing. Doesn't happen overnight, but it is something you have to learn
oops,
because, to your point, you don't learn it. You don't see it
no,
modeled. It's hard to find it out there in the self help. I mean, honestly, you were a godsend because this work is completely different than even the traditional
right.
therapeutics and going to psychotherapy. You know
Oh,
this. Well, you were at a 5-year-old, you knew
well,
the psychotherapy world
yeah, but
was.
and also I practiced traditional psychotherapy for 17 years. I was trained traditionally. And I wasn't
Mm,
happy with the results for me. I had had a ton of therapy and I was not happy with that. And I was doing therapy with others. I was not happy with that. I started to pray for a process or a teacher or something that would really work. And that's when I met Dr. Erica Chopitz. You found out about her in Healing Your Aloneness. And she had half of Interbonding and I had half of Interbonding. And so of course we had to meet and put it together. That was almost 40 years ago. And so this process has been evolving now for a very long time. And it's just become incredibly powerful. My whole life has changed as a result of this process. I'm like a completely different person than I was before inner bonding.
that's amazing. Well, I mean, I can attest to that as well because I've the same experience. I went through your work several years ago. I was in my early 30s. I'm almost 40 now. I've got a family. I've got a young daughter and a wife, and I know that I would not be able to be the husband and father that I am today were I not had I not learned because you still you can feel the emotions of other people around you, and we all have those choices, the moments each day by day, right, where you can dismiss, turn away, run away, or lean into them, as you said earlier. And I think a lot of us get so burdened by life. We're not to make excuses, right? It's because it's not. We have to take the responsibility of these things, but so many people don't realize the power that they hold, and I think
Right.
that's what changed for me was it was within me the whole time.
Yeah.
But I love that it was prayer that brought you that connected you and Dr. Chopin. Like, you said that you were praying for a process or something, right? That brought you to you
Yeah.
do you believe that that's
Y-
what it
y-
was?
Yeah. See, I was brought up by atheist parents, and in my household, God was a bad word. My dad would say,
Mm,
anybody who believes in God is just using that as a crutch. And so I was not brought
mm,
up with any spirituality, any religion, nothing. But I had that sense inside that there was something. And so before I started to pray for that, I got on a spiritual path. I started searching. I knew
mm,
I had had a few experiences of being able to feel guided by a source of love and a source of truth, but it would just sort of happen. And I wanted to be able to tap into that anytime I wanted. And that's one of the things that motivated me to start to pray for a process. And of course, the prayer was answered. And I learned through inner bonding and through help with Erica how to tap into that higher source at will. And that is an
mm,
amazing way to live. It's so completely different than relying on this lower brain program. We're all programmed with these beliefs, and this part of us has a kind of loud voice and says, this is what's true and this is what's real and this is what you have to do to protect yourself and you have to control this situation. And if you act this way, you can have control over getting love and avoiding pain and feeling safe, and you can have control over outcomes. And all of that are lies. These are lies that we were programmed
mm,
to believe. But when we learn to tap into our higher self or higher source, whatever somebody wants to call that, we tap into a source of truth and of comfort and of guidance. And it's such a completely different way to live. It's still amazing to me. I've been living this way for a long time, but it's still amazing to me. Yeah.
I love that. It really is. I mean, it's life changing. Dr. Paul, from your perspective, if I'm someone, someone that's listening and they may
Because
struggle with some spiritual concepts or something like that, like what would you suggest to them to explore that world, if you will?
what I suggest to people, regardless of what they believe, I mean, some people come to me and they have this awful concept of God as being this judgmental man in the sky, and they don't want anything to do with that. And so they've turned off to that, and other people just have no idea how to access it. So what I suggest to people is to imagine an older, wiser part of you, your own higher self, like
Mm,
you, 500 years older than you. And you have to use your
mm,
imagination. I encourage people to imagine like sitting in a beautiful place in nature at a picnic table with their older, wiser self or whatever works for them and have a conversation. And at the beginning, when I had these conversations, I was sure I was making it up. I mean, I didn't think I
mm,
was accessing anything real. So I had to test it out. And sometimes I would listen to what I thought I was making up, and other times I would not listen to what I thought I was making up. And invariably, when I listened, it turned out so much better. And so over time
mm,
of testing this out, I learned to trust that. And I didn't really care whether I was making it up or not. The information that would pop into my mind was so helpful and so right that I learned to trust that. And, it
mm,
doesn't matter what people believe regarding where it comes from. I was once working with a man, I'd been working with his wife, who was a spiritual woman, and she was really getting a lot out of it, and he was having a hard time. And so he came to me and he said, "Look, I don't want any of this spiritual stuff. I don't believe in it." And I said, "Okay, that's fine. But when you want to know what's loving, and that's step 4 of inner bonding is asking our higher guidance what's loving. When you want to know what's loving, ask the air. Just ask the air and see what happens." So he started asking the air and he started getting answers. And he said to me, "Look, I don't know
mm.
where they're coming from and I don't want to know, but I'm getting great answers and it's really helping me."
That's well, it's cool because in a way, that's actually a scientific approach, right? You're kind of putting stuff out there and things are coming back to
Oh,
you, then you're testing what you're getting
yeah.
back, and then just the example you gave, that gentleman didn't have any interest in that, but he couldn't argue against the answers that he
That's
was
right.
getting, right?
That's
Which
right.
is phenomenal.
Yeah.
So for you, and in a way, it can be whatever you potentially imagine, but the key is to ask those questions, have the dialogue, put things out there.
Right. And to recognize that spirit speaks to us in a soft voice, if it speaks at all. Sometimes it's images, sometimes it's feelings. The wounded part of us that comes from here, i- it's loud. It's like it acts like an authority. It acts like it knows what it's talking about when it's really completely ignorant. And so you
Mm.
have to kind of learn to be still and listen to what's popping into your mind.
So for you, I imagine then, are there a, a large? Do you often interact with people that are maybe not against, but aren't open to spiritual components? Or it happens a lot. I feel like we lived in a very scientific oriented. Even the way that you're describing the ego or that egoic self, our culture is really built around that almost personality type with the I'm an authority, I'm an expert, just the very but it's loud, it's harsh in a lot of
Yeah,
ways,
that's
isn't
that's
it?
right. And our society really doesn't support trusting your inner knowing, trusting your intuition, trusting your higher knowing, trusting what pops into your mind, that quiet voice or images that pop into your mind doesn't really support that. We don't really have anything in our society that trains kids to listen on the inner level. So, unless they have parents that really know how to do that, and I'm so glad that you learned inner bonding before you got married and had kids. That's why I always hope that parents will learn it before they have children because um, you want to be a role model for your child, and you can't be if you're abandoning yourself.
No, that's so true, and kids are incredible mirrors too. They're gonna show you where you're struggling too. I mean, I've learned even now, I mean, my daughter teaches me a ton just about myself and the relationship still. I mean, this work never is done either. And I think that's what's cool about it is it becomes a lifelong process. These are tools that we can learn. And that's what I talk about on the show is we're not no matter the lot in life we may find for ourselves or where we may find ourselves, we truly can overcome anything. We have so much glory and goodness and love within us, and it's to me, it's an obligation to share those things. That's why I talk about this stuff on the podcast, and it's an honor to be a parent like this. My wife, to her credit, we've talked a lot about this work, but as a mom, she started to see the impact that it was having on her relationship with Annabelle, as because she was feeling all this. She's got a lot of things that she's working on, that her own inner abandonment. I think, to your point earlier, all of us have learned to abandon
Yeah, that's right.
ourselves effectively, right?
Right.
And so it's a process we all have to go through, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and I've kind of found that there are four major ways that we've all learned to abandon ourselves, and one is, when we're little and there's pain, there's big feelings, we're too little to manage them, and so one of the things we learn to do is kind of dissociate from our body. We learn to go up in our head so that we can survive
Mm,
big feelings. And so, one of the ways people still abandon themselves is they stay focused in their mind and they completely disconnect from their body. Well, that's where the feelings are. So, again, like you don't want
mm,
to disconnect from Annabelle. You want to know when she's upset. But if you were just up in your head and not listening for her, you wouldn't know when she was upset. And that's what a lot of people do. They're up in their head and they're not listening. I call it having your inner baby monitor on, where you're listening. You have a baby, you
mm,
want to hear the baby cry. But people don't want to hear their inner child cry because they don't know what to do. And so, one way of
mm,
abandoning themselves is stay up in your head. And another way is to judge yourself. Most of us have learned to judge ourselves. I'm not
mm,
good enough. I'm not important. I'm not worthy. I'm not lovable. I'm inadequate. I mean, all kinds of judgments that you would never say to a child, but you're saying to your inner child. Well, that's a major form of self abandonment. And then you make yourself feel terrible. You make yourself feel anxious or depressed or angry or guilty or ashamed. And then you ignore the feelings that you're causing with your self judgment. And then a third one is there's so many people in our society that numb out we've got so many addictions. We've got food and alcohol and drugs and social media and spending and shopping and sex and pornography and overwork and so many ways of avoiding feelings by numbing out. Well, that's another form of self-abandonment. And then finally, and this really shows up in relationships, is that so many people get into a relationship thinking the reason to get into a relationship is to get love. This person is supposed to love me and make me
mm,
feel whole and make me feel safe and make me feel worthy. Well, unfortunately, we attracted our common level of self abandonment or our common level of love. So if you're entering a relationship wanting to get love, so is the other person. And that's a form of self abandonment, making the other person responsible for your sense of safety and your sense of worth, your definition of yourself, you're feeling whole and complete inside. It's like you're taking Annabelle and trying to hand her away to other people, saying to her, they have to like you for you to be okay. I don't want to be the one to love you. They have to like you for you to be okay.
mm, mm,
So many people do that. They hand away to other
mm,
people, and if that person likes them, they're okay, and if that person doesn't, they're not okay, and they're always trying to control getting approval. Well, doing that is automatic self-rejection, automatic self-abandonment, and even if the other person does give us some approval or some attention, it doesn't land because we're rejecting and abandoning ourselves, and so,
mm,
obviously, it becomes so important to learn to take responsibility for our own feelings so that we can enter a relationship to share love. That's a completely different relationship. It feels completely different to share love than always trying to get love. People think, they get a little bit of love and, oh boy, that feels great. That's what life is about, getting a little bit of love. They have no idea that that doesn't come close to sharing love. But we don't have love
mm,
to share unless we learn to tap into a source of love and bring that inside and fill ourselves up with love. And then from that full place inside, we have love to share. And that in my experience, is the highest experience in life, the sharing of love. But we just can't do it unless we learn to love ourselves.
Oh, so beautiful. And to be honest, Dr. Paul, I spent a large portion of my youth in that space, chasing love and women and partners and wanting to be accepted and wanting to be loved. And even when you got it, to your point, it's never enough. It's never enough to what and and you're always seeking and you're in a constant state of insecurity. People really don't have an idea of how wonderful it is when you feel from within. That's honestly the whole concept of order within is creating that order within yourself, having love within yourself. There's a source of love within us now,
Right.
but we don't know
That's
about it.
right. That's exactly right. And so the inner bonding teaches people how to tap into that, how to tap into that source of love, how to define their own self worth. That makes all the difference in the world. When you don't define yourself by externals, when you define yourself by who you are internally, that is completely different. You're defining yourself by your basic goodness, your kindness, your caring, your compassion, your honesty, your integrity. Those are the qualities that go with us when we leave. I don't believe the soul dies. I believe the soul is
Mm,
enduring, and that's who we really are. But so many people think that they are that wounded aspect of themselves that's never good enough and that doesn't look right and hasn't accomplished enough and doesn't have enough things to be okay. Oh, if
mm,
only I have another house or another boat. Or I mean, I get a lot of people I work with who are very wealthy, but they need one more
mm,
thing to feel okay, and it doesn't
mm.
do it. Mm.
It's a void within us, isn't it, that
Yeah,
we're trying to
that's right.
fill? You said it earlier, relationships, consumption, porn, sex, all this stuff, right? It's a
Yeah,
void.
and when we're abandoning ourselves, we create that void. We create the emptiness inside, and that emptiness wants to get filled. And what it needs is love, but it thinks it needs somebody else's love, somebody else's approval, somebody else's attention or admiration. When what it really needs is for us to learn to love ourselves.
Mm. If only our society would focus more on
Yeah.
that than the next shiny thing, right? Do you I'm curious your perspective on our culture as a whole and where we are today in 2023. There's a I've gone through a lot of changes with the way I look at our culture and the hypersexualization, the porn usage, the video games, the partying, the inability to even have spiritual conversations openly. I mean, there's so much of this stuff that's so important to us and enriches our life. It's almost you can't say any of it. And if you bring anything up, you get attacked for saying some of
Right.
these things.
That's
What do you from your perspective, Dr. Paul, like do you think this is stemming? Like is this reflecting our own inner abandonment? It's just created in our
Oh,
society?
yeah.
I'm
Oh,
curious your
yeah.
perspective.
I mean, look at commercials. Get this new car and then you'll be happy. Get this new
Mm,
house and then you'll be happy. And if you're not, take this drug rather than deal with how
mm,
you're
mm.
treating yourself. Yeah, our whole society
Yeah.
is so off course. I mean, and it's reflected on our planet because we create a lot of internal toxicity by the false beliefs, judging ourselves. And then, of course, there's, you mentioned nutrition, which I've been into for over 60 years now. And it's so toxic. The air is toxic, the water's toxic, the food, the GMOs, the pesticides, the 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 additives, the amount of sugar and things, the industrial seed oils. There's so much that is toxic in our environment, and of course, then our bodies become toxic, and that creates a lot of degenerative diseases, cancer, heart disease, autoimmune, diabetes, and it also creates when we're that out of balance in our gut because the bad bugs in our gut have taken over
Mm,
rather than the good bacteria taking over. It goes up into our brains and creates toxicity, and like 30 or 40 years ago, there was maybe 50 kids, 50 I don't know how many, it was so low in autism. It was like
Mhm.
1 in 20,000 is what it was, and now it's 1 in 50.
Mm.
So things like autism and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and ADD and ADHD, all of that is coming from the brain toxicity, from the toxicity in
Mm.
our bodies, the toxicity in our environment. And then see what's inner is reflected in the outer, and what's outer is reflected in the inner. So obviously, our planet is in deep trouble because
Mm.
there's the imbalance. Just like there's an imbalance on the inner level in most people, there's an imbalance on the external level. The cutting down the rainforest, the factory farms, the pollution, of course, has caused our
Yep.
planet to go into this global warming that's happening. I don't see how people can deny the hurricanes and the floods and the fires and everything that's going on. There's just I think the only people that deny it are the people who are benefiting out of their greed
Mm.
from the things that are causing it.
Well, one of my favorites is blaming all this on cows and all this
Oh,
stuff, and it's really like the monocropping and the way they industrial farms that they do. When you go and look, it's I've been learning a lot about regenerative
oh,
farming
good.
too, Dr. Paul, and like that. Because to your point, it's getting back closer to the earth. I read Nourishing Traditions many years
Yeah,
ago by Sally
yeah.
Fallon, and that work, Dr. Weston Price.
Oh,
Like it's all the things that you're describing. I know it's right in line. That's getting back to living close to the earth, because back in the day there was no such thing as organic. Everything just
that's
was
right.
organic. You
Everything
got
was.
foods from farms, right?
Yeah, that's
Like
right.
but but now it's so different, and it's interesting you brought up the blood brain toxicity, and because all those things that you described, Parkinson's, ADHD, like the autism, those are all
That's
brain-based
right.
diseases, right? And they degenerate over time. So when we're thinking about inner bonding, because that's really your emotional health, right? Your spiritual health, how do you tie in the nutritional component to it as well? I mean, is it when you work with your clients, do you hit them all, like, we go full force on all those areas, or do you kinda step into it? I'm
Yeah, I
curious how
I
you
kind of step
l
into it, but see, inner bonding is about loving yourself, not just emotionally. It's about loving yourself physically, financially,
Mm.
relationally, organizationally. There's many ways. A lot of people will operate as an adult, let's say financially or organizationally, but they completely abandon themselves physically and emotionally and spiritually. And so it's our responsibility, like as a parent, you're a parent. Your job is to take care of your family as well as you can, to keep things organized, to relate in a loving way, to financially support your family, to hopefully be guided by what is truly loving. And to keep yourself healthy so that the people around you are not burdened by you being sick. I mean, I think it's really selfish when people don't take care of themselves and they become burdens on everybody around them. There's so many people like that that just don't take care of themselves on the physical level. That's not loving to yourself, and it's not loving to
Mm.
anybody else. So this is a big area for me because I was a very sickly kid, and in my early 20s, I
Mm.
just hated. By that time, I hated being sick. And I started reading everything I could. I read Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, and I knew that she knew what she was talking about. And I read The
Mm.
Poisons in Your Foods by Longgood, and I thought, oh my God. And I threw everything out at that time and started to shop. There was one little health food store in Los Angeles at the time, and that's where I started to shop. And that's what I've been doing since then. And so
Mm.
now, I mean, it's taken a long time for people to see the results, but, most of the people my age, I just turned last Thursday, I turned 84, and
Wow. Awesome. You look
yeah,
amazing.
and so I think that this is kind of a long range study, a long-term study because I'm part of a group of 7 women who we were best friends in junior high, and
So
and
cool.
so we're all the same age and we meet once a month online. And all of them have so many physical problems that I don't have, but all of them have been
Mhm.
eating, the standard American diet, and I haven't. And so it's like it's almost like a scientific study because we all live in the same area, we're all the same religion, we all had similar parents, we're all very, very similar. And yet at this point, we're very, very different in our health.
Mm.
So I think that's pretty interesting.
That's really interesting. You're living proof what can happen when you make different decisions around our food,
Yeah,
right? Relative to your friends and I don't think people realize how much food nourishes our mind, our hearts, our
that's right.
bodies, our brain. Like that, the nutrition for our brain and our gut, that connection between our brain and our gut is very real. I notice it when I get out of line with the things that I'm eating, or if I'm not eating properly, I'll feel that cloudiness, that haziness, that fog. That all comes from specific foods, and it's we got a long way to go as a society, but it is encouraging to see. And by the way, I signed up for Thrive too. By the
Oh,
way,
good.
the
Excellent.
marketplace,
Yeah.
yeah. So I saw you, which is great. I didn't even realize that Thrive was around. We live in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, and luckily there's a lot of great local
Yeah.
farms and farmers markets here. But my hope is that this becomes more
Yeah.
normal. Like get back to that's one thing that Europe seems to do
Yeah.
really
They do it.
well, is the way
Yeah.
they do their food.
Yeah. They
Yeah.
do.
If we can do something similar to that. Unfortunately, our politicians all seem to be bought by giant
I
corporations,
know, I
and,
know. But you see, this also affects our ability to connect on the spiritual level because connecting on the spiritual level is about frequency. It's about, we operate, our bodies operate at a fairly low frequency, so we can see each other. If we vibrated like a hummingbird's wings, we couldn't see each other. So we have to
mm,
vibrate at a fairly low frequency, but spirit vibrates at a much higher frequency. So in order to connect, we have to raise our frequency. And I have found two
mm,
major choices that we need to make to be able to have a high enough frequency to have what I call at will divine connection. One of them has to do with our intention. And as you know, interbonding has only two intentions. One is the intention to
mm,
learn about loving ourselves and sharing our love with others. And the other is the intention to protect against pain with various forms of controlling behavior. One or the other. That's
mm,
it. When our intention is to control, our frequency goes down. When our intention is to learn
mm,
about love, our frequency goes up. So that's one of the secrets of connecting with our guidance is being able to learn to maintain a true intention to learn about starting with loving ourselves and then sharing our love. The other is the frequency of our body. And so if you're eating
mm,
sugar and processed foods and industrial seed oils and devitalized foods, factory farm foods, foods filled with pesticides and all that, that's really hard on the body. It's hard for the body to
mm,
utilize it. So it lowers the frequency of the body. And so if you really
mm,
want to have a high enough frequency to have at will divine connection, you not only have to practice being open to learning, and that is a practice, but you need to be eating clean, hopefully organic, natural foods, not filled with
mm.
sugar and junk.
Yeah. Oh, we really do have a long way to go around a lot of
Oh,
that.
yeah.
I think the good thing is a lot of people are waking up to it though, it
Yeah.
seems. I mean, at least from my experience, more people are wanting to live closer to the earth, living more simply, slowing down. There was a period where with social media and technology and we had all this explosion of information, which is incredible, but we've really disconnected from our roots as
Right.
humans and just the simplicity of going outside and being in
Yes.
nature and being right, all that stuff adds up. And it's interesting that you those two intentions that you were describing, to love yourself or to be in control. And control is a fear-driven
Yes. That's right.
frequency, isn't
That's
it?
right.
It's
And fear is a low
and
frequency.
exactly. Well, and our society perpetuates fear at many levels, doesn't it? The content we watch, the
Oh,
news,
yeah.
it's it's trying to keep us in a low
Right.
frequency. Do you if so from your perspective, Dr. Paul, like in my mind, I watched The Matrix, that movie. I don't know, maybe you've seen
Mm.
it or maybe you haven't, but it's to me, it's a real life depiction in a lot of ways of what people are experiencing. And I think part of it is unplugging from kind of the machine, if you will. And so for someone that's maybe plugged in heavily to social media, they're on their phone all the time, they're anxious all the time. Like from your perspective, Dr. Paul, what are a few things that people can do to start how can they start to learn some of these practices and these principles and start to implement them in their day to day?
Well, one of the first things they can do is go to our website at interbonding.com and download our free 7-day course. It'll give
Mm.
them the overview of inner bonding and let them know whether they want to pursue it further. We have a 30-day video course called Love Yourself. That's a great course for learning to love yourself. And like you said, your wife is reading the Inner Bonding Workbook, which teaches the process. There's many ways to learn it. I do a bi-monthly masterclass that's not very
Mm.
expensive for people, where I'm live for an hour and a half. I bring people through an inner bonding process. I speak on a topic, and then I do 15-minute laser sessions with people, taking them very deep
Mm.
in a very short period of time so that people can see how powerful this process is live at work. And surprisingly, many people are willing to come on and do their work live because they see how helpful it is to others. The people who are there watching get so much out of it. They put in the chat, "Thank you so much. That was so helpful," because we're all similar. We all have many of the same
Mm.
problems. So when somebody is willing to do their work, it's so helpful to other people. So that's another way of learning inner bonding. There's many ways of learning inner bonding, and we have a fabulous facilitator training program. And so we have
Mm.
many well-trained facilitators. I work with people individually if they can afford what I charge. And if they can't, they go to one of the facilitators. And we have them all over the world who who are there to support people in learning inner bonding, learning to love themselves and connect to their higher guidance. It's
That's amazing, Dr. Paul. Well, I was surprised when I started doing this. This had been going on for decades for me, that insecure, anxious, isolated feeling, the feeling of aloneness when you're with people, even people that you care
right,
about. That was when I knew that I was something was off because I was with people that I really cared about and I just felt
wrong.
alone. I didn't feel but that was that inner abandonment. But what was shocking to me is when you start taking action and you start applying these things, you start to feel better very quickly. Now, you don't do but you can feel positive impact very quickly,
Yes,
can't
you
you?
can. And and in a sense that's a problem because people start feeling better so quickly and they think, "Wow, I'm there." And then they stop doing
Yeah.
it. And that would be like being a great parent to a child for a few weeks and the child is so happy and then they're saying, "Well, I don't have to do that anymore." Doesn't work that way.
That's for sure. It's a
Yes, it
lifelong
is.
pursuit,
Yes.
isn't it? That's what I've learned. It's something you well, for me, Dr. Paul, when I started to realize that if I had saw my 5-year-old self on the side of the road and was upset as an adult, I would go to that child and I would kneel down to him and I would nurture him. I would ask him what's wrong. Can I help you find your parent? What do you need, man? Like, what do you need, little guy? And we don't once we start to get a sense of the relationship that we have with ourself, that inner
Yeah.
child, it doesn't go away. You got to keep doing it, but it becomes
Yes.
natural. It feels unnatural at first because you're like, "Why am I talking to myself? This is weird." I got a teddy bear when I first doing it. He was kind of represented my inner
Yeah.
child. Like there's a lot of cool things that you suggest that people can do to connect with our inner
Right.
child. But the joy, the healing, the creativity, the all the energy that comes from that, it's so
Yeah,
life-changing.
it is so life-changing. When before interbonding, I was writing books, but it was like torture. It was so hard for me to write
Mm.
and to get myself to sit down and write. I had things I wanted to say, but it was so hard. And I'm also an artist, and I would struggle with my creativity. After interbonding,
Mhm.
after I started to practice, after I learned to connect to my guidance and connect to that source of real creativity, it's completely different. When I write now, I just sit down and I say to my higher guides, "Okay, I've shown up, you're on." And I just let it come right through. Just come right through that book that your wife is going through. The publisher gave me 9 months to write that book, and I sat down for 6 weekends, and I told my guidance, "Okay, it's up to you," and completely finished it in 6 weekends, sent it off, and they loved it.
Wow. I mean, honestly, it's kind of like a superpower
Yeah,
in a
it
lot
is.
of ways. When you see how much the thing that I sometimes struggle with, Dr. Paul, is knowing these tools are there for us and they're available to
Yeah,
everyone, and seeing the people that you love and care for struggling and suffering and kind of stuck in their anxiety, and no matter what you share with them, it's like they assume that you just magically changed,
right.
or I it's frustrating. Sometimes you just wanna shake people, but I still believe that the best way to help others is to lead by example, to
That's
live.
right.
I mean, from your perspective, you've been doing this for a very long time. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is just accept people as they are, and let people be, and go about your day focusing on what you can control. What's your thoughts
Yeah, I
around
mean,
that?
that's exactly right. It's hard when you care about somebody to accept that you have no control over their intention. You have no control over whether they're ready to really open to learning about loving themselves, or when they or if they still want to have control over getting love and avoiding pain and feeling safe, which is obviously self-abandonment and causing them all the pain that they're trying to avoid. But we're powerless over another person's intention. So, like you said, the
Mm,
very best thing we can do is be loving role models. And very often
mm.
people say to me, I want what you have. And that's great. I want what you have. And I'm ready to learn to do what you do. And that's great. And
Mm,
and and so the more we each learn to take care of ourselves and show up as our true selves, our caring, loving, kind, compassionate selves in the world, the more we impact other people, and the more we're in joy. How many people do you know who live in joy? And yet, when you
mm.
really learn to love yourself, you start to have inner peace. You start to have joy. People see that, and that's the best way we can affect others. We can suggest things to others, take the free course, read this book, but then we have to back off because either they are ready for it or they're not ready for it. And like you said, we have to just accept that because there's nothing we can do other than continue to do our own inner work.
Yeah, that's great. That's sometimes the hardest thing to do, but you really do just have to lead by example and accept it what it
Right.
is. And you said it earlier too. It's such a different place coming from I need to get love versus I'm sharing love within me, coming from within me. It really is an overflowing
Yeah,
cup that you're coming
that's
from.
right.
I it's life changing, and that's why I was so excited to have you on the show because sometimes I'm like, I'm not just saying this, I'm not just sharing these things. Like I really, if, but the hard part is there's all this stuff that you feel sometimes inside of you, and you want to say, here, you can feel my 17-year-old self, feel all that anxiety, feel that fear, and then feel what you feel with me now. That wasn't accidental. That happened through
That's
intention, and
right.
and honestly, Dr. Paul, so much of the work that you created, I mean, really truly was the tool set to live by. I'm still doing it. We're ideally going to teach it to our daughter. My wife's learning it. Like it's incredible. So I just want to thank you for everything that you've done because you're honestly a modern day hero for me, and it's been a true blessing to have you
Well,
here.
thank you
So
so much.
well, so Dr. Paul, before we part ways, is there anything that you would like to share with the audience that's relevant to what you're working on, or anything before we go?
I just want people to know that anybody can learn this. If you really want to learn inner bonding, if you really want to learn these 6 steps, if you really want to learn to love yourself and connect with your spiritual guidance, learn to see how beautiful you are in your soul, you can do it. Everybody has the capability of doing this. It's just about whether or not you want to. So I really encourage you to take a look at it and see how that feels to you.
That's awesome. Well, I certainly attest to that. Dr. Paul's work is fantastic. Well, Dr. Paul, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I hope you got some value out of this. I know like, what we discussed is truly life changing, and I second that. I really hope that you'll take the leap of faith. Even if you're calling the air to you, as you shared
Right.
earlier, the answers can come. That love is within us, and it truly is. It truly is there. for the finding.
Right.
So, Dr. Paul, I really appreciate your time. Hopefully others will find value and wisdom in your work. I know they will if they give it a shot. And to the listeners, appreciate your eyes, your ears, all of that. And until next time, y'all. Thank you for listening to Order Within. If you found the episode helpful, please consider sharing, rating, and subscribing. New episodes will be released every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until next time, y'all.